The mansion buzzed with excitement, like a living creature awakened by the presence of guests. Laughter and the clinking of glasses blended into a single rhythm, echoing through the high-vaulted ceilings. I stood at the very heart of this magnificent building, but I felt like a fish pulled from water. This house, with its luxury and history, was my home only by name. The grand hall, as though come to life from the pages of a novel, shimmered with its exquisite decor. Everywhere were tall vases filled with the fragrant roses, their petals filling the air with a sweet scent. As I entered the hall, familiar and unfamiliar faces flickered around me, their voices blending into a melody of light social chatter. My husband David was standing surrounded by a couple of his friends. His sincere laughter stood out among the other sounds, like a warm beacon in cold water. David had a gift he could make people feel at ease. This quality captivated me from the very beginning. When our eyes met across the room, he gave me an encouraging smile. It warmed me, like a sunbeam breaking through the shadows. To my right stood David's mother, Bella. Her figure epitomized strength and elegance, her posture perfect, and her gaze impenetrable. She ruled the room like a true queen, surrounded by a group of women eagerly hanging on her every word. They laughed at her jokes, agreed with her opinions, competing for her approval. It seemed that the whole scene had been carefully crafted, like a theatrical performance where Bella played the lead role. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my strength and made my way toward her. "Good evening, Bella," I began, infusing my voice with all the warmth I could muster. "This is a lovely party. Thank you for inviting me." She gave me an assessing look, one that seemed to penetrate my outer shell and go straight to my soul. "So, you're the newcomer," she said in a flat tone, with a hint of curiosity and a slight superiority. Keeping my composure, I nodded. "Yes, that's me. David speaks very highly of you." Her gaze slowly swept over my outfit, and after a brief pause, she added, "You could use the help of a fashion consultant." Her remark rang out loudly, like the tolling of a bell, causing the women nearby to giggle, catching the subtle meaning. I felt a blush rise on my cheeks. However, not wanting to show weakness, I responded with the courtesy. "Thank you for the advice. I always appreciate good recommendations." Maria, Bella's daughter and David's sister, stepped forward with a playful smile. "Mom always knows best, doesn't she?" I smiled, trying to appear carefree. "Oh, absolutely," I replied, attempting to keep my balance in this unexpected dance of words. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed David making his way through the crowd. When he approached, his presence became a safe haven for me. "I see you've met my lovely wife," he said with a warm smile. "We're just getting acquainted," Bella replied with a slight smirk. Her tone was friendly, yet there was still an undercurrent of tension in the air, like an uninvited guest. David sensed it and, perhaps, decided to shift the atmosphere. "How about a dance, darling?" he suggested, extending his hand. He gratefully accepted his offer, feeling as though the room receded, leaving us alone. As he led me to the dance floor, I whispered, "Thank you." "Always," he replied softly, squeezing my hand in his. The evening turned into a whirlwind of performances, dances, and polite conversation. But that moment with Bella felt like a harbinger. It was clear that I was an outsider among them, a stranger in this world where everything obeyed invisible rules and the conventions. As the house settled into the quiet of the night, its majestic beauty felt different. The spacious hallways, winding staircases, countless rooms, all of them reminded me of my solitude. I tried to bring warmth and the soul to the place, adding something personal to the corners of the rooms, decorating them with the details that could tell our story. But the mansion remained a museum, cold and grand, as though rejecting my efforts to become part of its history. The morning found me in thought, filled with vague unease. David had already left for work, and I, trying to bring some comfort to the house, had spent the last half hour in our living room. He rearranged books, added personal photos to the shelves, small fragments of our shared past, attempting to decorate the cold, impersonal spaces of the mansion. Just as I placed one of our honeymoon photos on the shelf, the door opened without a knock. Before I could even turn around, I heard the familiar, confident step of Bella. Her lips curled into that very smirk which always concealed more than it revealed. Good morning, Bella, I began, trying to sound friendly. I didn't expect to see you so early. She cast a fleeting glance around the room, as if scanning every detail. Her eyes stopped on the photographs I had just placed. I just decided to see how you're settling in, she remarked with an affected casualness. I picked up one of the photos, a picture of David and me by the sea, hugging with the setting sun in the background. David and I wanted to add a bit of personality. He started, but Bella stepped forward and, without waiting, took the photograph from my hands. "Oh, how sweet," she said, studying the picture. "But, darling, we usually keep personal photos in the bedrooms." Her words sounded like a soft shot, perfectly timed to make me feel out of place. He opened my mouth to respond, but just then Maria entered the room. Her voice rang with an insincere sweetness that was impossible to ignore. "Mom, don't overwhelm her," she said, giving me a small wink. "She is still learning." He smiled, trying to keep my composure. "Yes, still learning," I replied, feeling my voice come out unnaturally. "Thank you both for the advice." Bella seemed to be continuing her inspection. She walked over to the table, ran her finger along the surface, and with the deliberate drama, showed me the almost invisible layer of dust. "You really should clean more often," she noted with a light laugh. Maria burst out laughing. "Or maybe hire someone who actually knows how to do it." That comment hit my pride. It felt my cheeks burn. "I cleaned yesterday," I began, trying not to lose my composure. "But perhaps the house is too large for one person." "Oh, we managed just fine before you came," Bella replied, with that same smirk of hers that always left the feeling of an impending storm. It took a deep breath, gathering the remnants of my strength. "I couldn't let them see how despair was creeping in." "I appreciate your feedback," I responded, trying to sound neutral. "Perhaps you could offer me your proven cleaning system, or recommend someone who's helped you. It's always helpful to learn from others' experiences." Bella and Maria exchanged a glance, their smiles full of concealed triumph. He realized it was time to leave before this game got out of my control. "I need to go shopping," I said, stepping toward the door. "Thank you for the visit." As I left the room, I could feel their gazes like heavy chains on my back. Bella and Maria had made it clear that this house was their territory, and I was merely a guest, someone who had inadvertently broken their rules. Even the silent objects of the mansion seemed to scream about my status. The heavy curtains, the antique furniture, the perfectly polished floors, everything reminded me that I didn't belong here. It seemed that even the shadows on the walls whispered, outside it. The mansion was a living being, breathing and watching. Its cold walls absorbed every trace of my uncertainty, returning it to me amplified. Every time I tried to discuss the possibility of moving with David, Bella somehow always appeared in their way. Her barely perceptible interventions created insurmountable obstacles, turning my dreams of warmth and comfort into elusive illusions. The evening was one of those when the mansion filled with life and sound, but instead of comfort and joy, I felt like a guest in someone else's home. The mansion buzzed with endless conversation, laughter, and the clinking of glasses, spilling in waves through its high ceilings and heavy curtains. These gatherings were more than mere meetings, they were parades of Bella's power and status. When I entered the hall, the light from the chandeliers blinded me for a moment. I adjusted the hem of my dress, trying to regain control of my nerves. Bella's voice sliced through the air like the strike of a gong. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, and all conversation ceased, as if on an invisible signal. "Our latest addition to the family has finally graced us with her presence." The room exploded with laughter. It could feel my veins tighten with ice. Some guests looked embarrassed, unsure whether to laugh or stay serious. But in the next moment, Maria joined the performance, her voice sounding with deliberate sweetness. Perhaps she was late because she got lost. "This house can really confuse newcomers." This remark sparked another wave of laughter, sincere from some and purely polite from others. I knew it was a well-scripted moment Bella and Maria were playing to the crowd. Trying not to let my emotions show, I walked toward a group of young people, David's cousins. Their faces seemed friendlier, and I hoped to find a moment of calm in the self-tension. But before I could utter a word, one of the older relatives, an uncle in an expensive suit, interjected, likely trying to defuse the situation. "Oh, I heard you're quite the cook. Did you prepare something special for tonight?" He opened my mouth to respond, but Bella once again took control, her voice surprisingly light yet each word meticulously calibrated. "Yes." She tried her hand at making the main dessert, she said with a faint smile. "We all remember her last attempt, don't we?" The laughter was louder this time. Edward struck deep. He recalled that dinner when, trying to impress, I had baked a chocolate cake that had slightly burned because of my nerves. To me, it was just an unfortunate evening, but to Bella, it was a tool for manipulation and humiliation. Feeling the heat greasy in my cheeks, I took a deep breath, determined not to let them see me falter. "I hope tonight's dessert will delight everyone," I replied, smiling as sincerely as I could. Sometimes mistakes teach us more than successes. My response caused a momentary confusion among the crowd, and someone even nodded in approval. Bella squinted, her gaze sweeping the room as if searching for her next opportunity to strike. All the while, David was busy talking with the guests on the other side of the room. His absence felt especially sharp in that moment. He sought his eyes, hoping he would come to my rescue, but he seemed fully engrossed in conversation with an old friend. "Resilience," one of the younger cousins near me suddenly said, "is something we value in our family." He nodded, clinging to those words like a lifeline. "I agree. True strength lies in moving forward despite obstacles," I said. My response was directed not so much at him as at Bella and Maria, but before I could say more, I was called to the table. As we sat down for dinner, I felt the conversations around me take on a new layer of tension. Bella and Maria conducted the dialogue with such skill that even their most innocent remarks seemed laced with venom. It felt as though the entire evening was another test, designed to gauge my resilience. While I maintained my composure, the sense of isolation inside me grew. These house, these people, their conversations, all of it felt alien. No matter how hard I tried, my role in this performance was limited to what they allowed. Maria had a knack for jumping into the fray, but despite her bold energy, she never found herself in the center of the most turbulent clashes. Instead, she was like a gliding shadow, knowing precisely how to wound before disappearing around the corner, unseen yet effective. That evening, she seemed particularly confident as she delivered her provocative comment. He noticed her lips curl slightly into a smile as she looked at me across the table, her eyes sparkling with a malicious amusement. "Oh yes," she drawled, as if offhandedly. "Let's hope tonight doesn't disappoint like the last time." Edwards, as always, left their invisible but shot marks in the air. He felt them cutting into me from within. Despite my best efforts to choose the right words, I couldn't entirely hide my unease. The entire room seemed to turn toward me, as if I were no more than a figurine displayed on the vast canvas of their lives. The weight of their attention was almost crushing. I took a deep breath, gathering myself before responding. "Yes, I tried a new recipe," I said, striving to keep my voice light, though a storm raged within me. "I hope everyone enjoys it." These words felt like nothing more than a defensive wall, a barrier I erected to conceal my true state. The evening wore on, and the tension in the air grew ever more palpable. Bella and Maria orchestrated their usual game, pushing me into the most vulnerable moments, making me feel like the center of their scrutiny. They sought out every opportunity for critique, every moment to point a finger whether at my choice of attire, the way I spoke, or how I held a glass. My entire existence seemed to be under analysis, with nothing off limits in their game. It was exhausting, both physically and emotionally. Every movement I made, every word I spoke was met with their shocked gazes, full of judgment. David, seated beside me, seemed increasingly distant. You could see him making an effort to remain polite, staying out of the fray, even when Bella made another disdainful remark about my family background. He glanced at him, hoping for some acknowledgement, even the smallest spark of support. But he merely looked away, took a sip from his glass, and resumed his conversation with other guests. He felt the realization settle over me like dust, real and heavy, that I was completely alone in this room. A room full of people, and yet there was no one to shield me, no one to stand by me. That loneliness burned deep. The only person who showed me any sympathy was Aunt Junice's daughter-in-law, who occasionally exchanged empathetic glances with me or whispered a few words of encouragement when no one else was listening. "You're stronger than their words," she once murmured as she passed me, offering a quiet reassurance. Words, though comforting, couldn't lighten the heaviness in my chest or fill the cold void brought by the realization that yet another gathering had passed, and nothing had changed. Bella and Maria continued to play their roles, while I remained nothing more than a pawn in their theater. It was unbearable. The days following the evening were filled with the same tension. Every glance, every step felt observed, as though everything around me slowed down, like in a film where each frame sought to capture my weakness. But I could no longer pretend. One morning, as I chose an outfit, I felt the tension in the air become almost palpable. I decided to wear a dress I hadn't worn since I was a bride. It was bold, vibrant, with an unexpected cut that defied all norms and expectations. I had previously been afraid to wear in Bella's house, worried it might be seen as a challenge. But today, I felt strong enough to take that step. The dress was not just clothing, it became a symbol of change for me and for everyone in this house. As I descended the staircase, I could feel their gazes, like sharp blades piercing through me. Bella sat in the living room, flipping through a magazine. She glanced up from the page, her eyes widening slightly, as though something about my appearance surprised her. There was something subtle yet striking in her expression. "What is the occasion?" she asked sarcastically, as if this was a moment that disrupted her carefully curated plans. I chose not to respond to her mockery. Instead, meeting her gaze, I calmly said, "I felt a change might be refreshing." I walked past her, ignoring her displeased silence, and headed to the kitchen. There, I decided to take another step. This time, instead of serving Bella and Maria first, as was customary, I helped myself to a portion of the food. David looked surprised but said nothing. I felt his gaze follow me, full of confusion, though he didn't seem prepared to intervene. The entire day continued in the same spirit. I seemed to break one unspoken rule after another, and Bella made no effort to hide her displeasure. That evening, when she started casting pointed glances my way, I no longer felt fear. I was no longer the woman they could manipulate. "Perhaps we should host another gathering next week," Bella suggested, attempting to reassert control, though her words fell flat. "Maybe we'll skip it," I countered, deciding that this time I would set the terms. Maria's eyes flashed with irritation, sharp as lightning, as she shot me a glance. "Mother always organizes these gatherings," she said, as though her words alone could restore the status quo. Why should this month be any different? Why now? It was as if I had disrupted some sacred order they believed I wasn't even aware of. Before I could respond, David intervened, trying, as always, to diffuse the tension. He stepped into the role of mediator, attempting to bring balance to the situation, but the storm was already brewing, like a cloud heavy with water before a downpour. "Perhaps we can discuss this later," he said, but I could sense that his words couldn't extinguish the fire already ignited. In response to his interference, Maria scoffed, and I realized that the winds of change were blowing, and there was no turning back. As the next gathering at the house approached, the tension became almost tangible. I felt a strange mixture of fear and resolve, as if my entire being was preparing for an inevitable battle but didn't know how it would end. I was no longer willing to retreat, and I knew this evening would be pivotal, a night that would either free me from the burden of submission or cement my role in the theater. The day of the feast arrived. Guests began pouring into the house, and its walls seemed to fill with noise and chatter. It was a grand occasion, the table adorned with Bella's finest china, silverware, and food that smelled divine, as though the very atmosphere of the house sought to remind everyone who was in charge. My footsteps echoed in the spacious living room, as if this moment had been staged for me. He entered wearing the dress that made me feel confident, my head held high, and, as expected, Bella was among the first to notice. "Oh, look at you," she said with a biting smile, mockingly pointing out how much effort I seemed to have put in. "Yes, and did that right?" Maria, unable to resist, chimed in with her own dose of venom. "What is the occasion? Why the sudden change?" He didn't flinch or look away. Today, I was ready. This was the moment. I wasn't merely reacting, I was setting the rules of the game. I looked at her directly, meeting her gaze, and calmly replied, "Every day is an opportunity for change, Maria. It's about time." Whispers filled the room. I could sense the shock from some of the guests, unaccustomed to this side of me, more resolute, defiant, unwilling to remain the person they expected me to be. The atmosphere shifted immediately, conversations quieted, and only the muffled hum of unease reached my ears. Dinner began, and while the moment felt theatrical, there was an air of inevitability hanging heavy in the room. The tension built like a thundercloud, ready to burst at any moment. Bella seized every opportunity for her usual jabs, starting with the food. She couldn't resist commenting on one guest's outfit before quickly turning her attention to my dish. With a smirk that barely concealed her disdain, she remarked, "Look at this, our dear daughter-in-law has decided to try out some new recipes. Let's hope it's edible." Anger surged within me, but I knew this was the moment to remain composed. I took a deep breath, reining in my emotions, and replied, "Bella, since you've been here, we both know that opinions are shared freely." I paused, letting my words hang in the air like a silent challenge. "Perhaps your cooking could use a little more flavor, and your dress, well, maybe it was fashionable 10 years ago." The words shot out like arrows, and I could see the impact on her, as if she'd been struck with the slap she couldn't avoid. The room fell silent for a moment. Her sharp breaths filling the space like the strange sound of a coiled spring about to snap. Bella froze, as if unable to believe what had just happened. Maria, always ready to leap to her mother's defense, scowled and glared at me with fiery indignation. "How dare you?" she cried, her voice cold and cutting like a blade. I didn't back down. Looking directly at her, I continued in the same steady tone. "And you, Maria, have spent so much time in your mother's shadow that I wonder, do you even have an opinion of your own?" My words echoed like thunder in a clear sky. Bella finally found her voice, her reaction swift and sharp. She leaned back in her chair, lowering her gaze as she spoke, her words dripping with venom. "You are so ungrateful." I didn't let her finish. My voice was calm, yet filled with an unwavering determination, capable of cutting through ice. "Bella, I am a part of this family, whether you like it or not." The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Some guests tried to diffuse the tension with light conversation, pretending nothing had happened, while others, sensing the mood wouldn't improve, left quickly. When the last guest had exited and the door closed behind them, I knew the real storm was only just beginning. The immediate aftermath of the gathering was felt at once. Bella, Maria, and David settled in the living room. He joined them, determined to resolve the situation once and for all. The truth, long unspoken, hung in there like an invisible thread that had finally snapped. Maria was the first to break the silence, her voice filled with indignation and disbelief. "You crossed a line tonight," she burst out, barely concealing her anger. "How could you embarrass us like that in front of our guests?" I met her gaze, unflinching, my voice steady with conviction. "I spoke the truth, Maria. If the truth embarrasses you, perhaps it's time for some self-reflection." I could see her face flush crimson, her anger blazing like a fire. Bella, unable to remain silent, responded next. Her words crawled through the room, heavy with malice. "You come into this family and think you can change everything?" I felt the storm inside me race against the chaos that swirled around. Out loud, I replied calmly, "No, Bella, I don't want to change everything. I simply want respect." "Is that too much to ask?" She turned away, but her expression radiated disdain. At last, David spoke. His voice, usually soft and even-tempered, wavered with unease. "Can we all just calm down? Fighting won't solve anything." He turned to him, a wave of exhaustion washing over me like a storm surge. "David, you've been silent all this time." "This isn't just about tonight," I said, barely holding back the bitterness in my voice. "It's about every day, every comment, every criticism." "Why haven't you said anything?" David stared at the floor, as though searching for the right words, though none seemed to come. He struggled, grasping at excuses. "I was trying to keep the peace," he said quietly. I thought it would get better with the time. His words, like a bitter pill, felt cold and hollow. Keeping the peace doesn't mean turning a blind eye, I said, my voice trembling but resolute. David, don't you understand that this peace you're trying to preserve has long ceased to exist? It's an illusion. He didn't respond. The room fell silent once more, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of realization, the kind that comes after masks are dropped and the facades crumble. In that silence, I felt everything around me shift. Bella looked more vulnerable than I had ever seen her, her face dimmed, stripped of its usual confidence. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "I only wanted what was best, for my son." He replied softly but firmly, "And what about what's best for me?" She tried to say something, but I was no longer listening. He knew that for her, her own idea of what was right would always outweigh my feelings or desires. And despite her words, it no longer mattered. "It doesn't matter," I said, as the weight of the night as the events began to settle over the room. The family, bound for so long by pretense and appearances, now stood at a crossroads. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope, a hope that perhaps things could change for the better. The house, once a symbol of hope and the new beginnings, had become a prison of judgments and unsolicited advice. No matter how hard I had tried to fit into this world, to build a life aligned with their expectations, I realized it was not my path. As I began packing my bags, I reflected on the journey I had undertaken, the attempt to become what they wanted me to be. Slowly, I came to understand it was impossible. They would never truly accept me for who I was. And in that realization, I learned an important lesson. I saw that despite all my attempts to conform to their standards, I would ultimately have to stoop to their pettiness. But I wasn't willing to do that. I didn't want to be part of a world that stifled and constrained. When David walked into the room, his face was pale with worry. "You're leaving?" he asked, disbelief evident in his voice. "Yes, David," I replied calmly. "I've shown that I can play their games, that I can be just like them, but that's not who I truly am." He paused for a moment, letting the weight of my words sink in. I didn't want to lose myself in their superficial world. It couldn't be the person they wanted me to be. It could no longer be someone who constantly had to please and conform. "We can't fix this, David," I said, my voice quiet yet filled with resolve. "This isn't about working things out anymore. It's about me preserving my essence, my dignity. I deserve more than just fitting into their world, more than merely being tolerated." The drive to the lawyer's office felt both long and short. It was the end of one chapter in my life and the beginning of an entirely new one. Moving to a new city opened doors to fresh opportunities and gave me a chance for a new start. I built a career where I was valued for my skills and character, not for being someone's daughter-in-law or wife. I was free to be myself. I began forming genuine connections with people who didn't see the world through the narrow lens of societal expectations. Over time, I began to thrive, not as someone they wanted me to be, but as an individual with my own identity. The entire process was a revolution within me. The irony was that my success, both personal and professional, soon became the talk of the town. The same people who had once looked down on me now gossiped about my accomplishments. But by then, their opinions no longer mattered. I had proven to myself that I could be like them, but I chose a path of kindness, understanding, and self-preservation. I learned to prioritize myself, disregarding what others thought. I placed my mental and emotional well-being above their approval, because I deserved to be myself. In that choice, I found the peace and happiness that had long eluded me. I no longer allowed their opinions to define my life. I learned to stand firm in my truth and authenticity. And finally, I thrived.